I'm Grace Lynn. I'm 30. I build software and mind my business literally. Last night, I learned I'm also the family ghost. Picture this, a black tie gala at the Bellevue Hotel ballroom, $250 million in projected revenue glittering on a banner behind the stage. Applause, laughter, 1,000 champagne flutes clinking. My mother poised like she always is, speaking into a mic as though it were a courtroom. And that's why your sister Evie is now CEO of Lynn Global Solutions. She understands people. She's earned this. Then she handed Evie an oversized check for $1.5 million, her leadership bonus, for my invention. The app I spent 14 months building after hours, fueled by Red Bull and trauma. The app that pulled our family's logistics firm out of a slow death spiral. The app that saved our business when not even our competitors would pick up the phone anymore. Evie stood all teeth and curls, accepting the check like she'd just hosted a bake sale and single-handedly fed the company. The applause was deafening. I raised my glass like a good daughter and toasted her, my smile frozen. Something inside me iced over. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just watched as 400 pairs of eyes looked past me like I was some intern who'd fetched the coffee. See, Lynn Global was dying last year. The kind of death where payroll bounced trucks sat idle and clients ghosted us mid-quarter. Mom kept pretending everything was fine. Legacy company's weather storm, she'd say like a slogan on a dusty poster. We didn't need a slogan, we needed a miracle. So I built one. The app, Streamline, wasn't just code. It was a full operational overhaul, live inventory tracking, predictive routing, automated supply matching. It halved overhead in 3 months. Our biggest client, who had 1 foot out the door, tripled their order volume. Suddenly, the company was a phoenix. But no one saw the ashes I clawed through to make it happen. I worked my 9 to 5 as an IT systems manager, aka glorified printer whisperer. Then I coded at night from my tiny apartment, after reheating frozen dumplings and chasing bugs like sleep didn't exist. Evie. She was business development. Translation, she took lunches with people who didn't understand logistics but liked wine. And yet there she was, bathing in my spotlight. Grace smiled, she hissed under her breath for a photo. You're part of this too. Part of what exactly? The betrayal. By the time dessert rolled around, I was already calculating. Quiet, controlled. What no one knew, not Evie, not my mother, not the board full of smug handshakers, is that I never transferred the IP. Not even a line of code. I'd kept it on a private repo. Documented, copyrighted, isolated from their greedy claws. They thought I was the tech girl. They forgot I was also the legal guardian of their entire operation. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. Not to cry at my desk. I don't do tears. I came to prepare. My lab was a converted broom closet in the basement where IT got banished years ago. Still, I liked the quiet. No one came down unless the Wi-Fi died. Except that morning. Evie was there, leaning over my whiteboard like it was hers to admire. You've got brilliant handwriting, she said, flashing her usual pageant grin. Admiring your work, I asked. Come on, Grace, last night was business, not personal. That word business burned like acid. You presented my work like a group project you led. Took a $1.5 million bonus and a title you didn't earn. Evie sighed the way only golden children sigh when you ruin their parade. Look, I didn't write the code, but I positioned it, branded it, sold it. That's leadership. And the ownership. Oh, Grace. The company owns the app. You were an employee when you made it. It's all under Lynn Global. I tilted my head. Is it? She blinked. I smiled. She didn't know. None of them did. That was mistake number 1. Evie left the basement pretending she'd won something. She hadn't even realized the game had changed. I sat at my desk, turned on my old ThinkPad, the one I'd used for all my personal dev work, and opened a folder labeled Plan B. Every backup, every commit log, every dated note from my dev journal was sitting there like an insurance policy I'd never wanted to cash in. Until last night. I double-checked the timestamps. Metadata never lies. Nearly 80% of the codebase was created off-site after hours on my own gear. What the family thought they owned, they never legally possessed. I'd warned them in subtle ways. During development, I sent status updates only through personal email. I asked legal questions in front of our in-house counsel just to see if anyone would catch the drift. They didn't. They thought I was being quirky. What they didn't see was the quiet line I'd drawn months ago. They crossed it in a ballroom full of strangers. By 8:40 a.m., I'd already forwarded the whole archive to Heather Preston. Heather was one of those attorneys who never raised her voice but could still make judges second-guess their own rulings. She was brilliant, terrifying, and just my type of ally. We met last year at a Women in Tech event. She complimented my UI design, then handed me her card with a wink. Call me when your genius needs protection. I saved her number. I wasn't planning on using it. But here we were. She called back in 5 minutes flat. I've reviewed your material, she said after my quick summary. And you're not crazy. You're the rightful IP holder. And judging from this gala fiasco, they're about to walk into a legal trap they don't even know exists. They'll say I did it on company time, that I'm being petty, that it's just tech support noise. Then it's time they learn the value of noise, she replied. Meet me outside the boardroom at 8:55. And Grace, don't explain, just show them. At 8:54, I stood outside the glass-walled conference room where Mom, Evie, and the board gathered. I could already hear the clipped laughter inside, the kind of smug, backslapping confidence only old money and generational loyalty could manufacture. Heather arrived looking like an Armani ad with the facial expression of a courtroom ambush. We didn't knock. We walked in as the clock hit 9 Huzrud exactly. Mom's smile faltered. Grace, you're just in time, and... Who's this? This is my attorney, I said, sitting opposite Evie. Her name is Heather Preston. We're here to address the new executive structure. You'll want to hear this. The temperature dropped like someone opened a freezer door. Heather calmly opened her portfolio and began distributing documents around the table. Evie looked down, her face twitching. Mom's jaw clenched but stayed silent. This, Heather said, tapping the cover page, is a preliminary licensing agreement for the Streamline application. As the documentation demonstrates, my client Grace Lynn is the sole creator and copyright holder of said software. Excuse me, Mom's voice was now ice. That's absurd. The software was developed under Lynn Global's roof by a Lynn Global employee. Heather didn't flinch. Incorrect. Grace did her day job for the company. This software was a separate effort, developed primarily during personal time using personal hardware. Your own employee agreements don't cover offsite IP unless explicitly assigned, which it never was. I stayed silent. There was power in not repeating myself. Let the paper do the talking. And it did. The version history, the timestamps, the emails, all of it sat in black and white, methodically organized and legally bulletproof. Evie sputtered, "This is just vindictive. You're holding the whole company hostage because you weren't picked." "No," I said flatly. "I'm protecting what I built and offering a fair licensing deal to a company that wants to continue using it. That's not hostage-taking, that's business, something you were promoted for understanding." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Mr. Reyes, a former Microsoft exec turned venture advisor, picked up the paperwork again. If these documents are accurate, the company may not have any enforceable claim to the software. Mom glared at him like he'd betrayed some unspoken family code. "We're not negotiating under duress. No one's asking you to." Heather replied, still calm. "You're welcome to reject the licensing agreement, but then you'll need to cease use of the Streamline platform immediately, which, considering 92% of your clients now rely on it, would effectively shut down operations." Silence. Mom stared at me across the table. I expected rage, but what I saw instead, just for a flicker, was fear. "Let's take a short recess," she said. Her voice was tight, her knuckles white. We all filed out. Heather and I stepped into the hallway. She leaned against the wall, flipping her phone open. "They're going to come back with a counteroffer. You should prepare for pressure, maybe even emotional blackmail." "I know," I said. "They've been practicing that my whole life." Inside, I could hear raised voices through the glass. Evie was pacing, Mom gesturing sharply. The company lawyer, our company lawyer, just sat there, his expression unreadable. They weren't strategizing, they were scrambling. I felt something settle inside me, not revenge, not yet, but clarity. I wasn't here to burn it all down, I was here to claim what was mine. No shouting, no sob stories, just proof, just leverage. When we returned, they were waiting. Mom's face was neutral now, CEO mask fully reattached. She motioned for everyone to sit. After consulting with counsel, she began, "We're willing to offer a settlement. A one-time payment of $5 million in exchange for full ownership of the application and all related IP. $5 million. For something that had made them 50 so far and was projected to make 200 more this fiscal year." Evie nodded like she was offering me a golden parachute. I let the silence hang before I answered. "That's a generous offer," I said, "but you're not buying code. You're buying vision. And I'm not selling that cheap." Heather slid a new document forward. "This," she said, "is our counter." I stared at the check like it was something rotten wrapped in gold foil. $5 million, the amount alone could make most people disappear quietly. It was enough to buy a new life somewhere warm, open a cafe, pretend none of this ever happened. They thought it would be enough for me. They thought I was small enough to take their hush money and vanish. I guess they'd never seen me angry before. Real anger doesn't look like yelling or flipping tables. Real anger sounds like quiet certainty and documents with legal teeth. I pushed the offer back across the table. "Not interested," I said. Mom's face didn't twitch, but the room did. Even the board members who'd been playing it cool suddenly shifted in their seats like someone had kicked their legs under the table. Evie crossed her arms. "So what exactly do you want, Grace?" "Just say it. You want to be CEO?" I leaned forward just slightly. I want the truth to match the credit, that's all. You have a title now, Mom snapped her voice tight. Chief Technology Officer. We gave you that before you brought in lawyers. You're being greedy. No, I'm being deliberate. The difference was important. Heather handed out our counterproposal, nothing flashy, just facts. A licensing structure that reflected Streamline's value. Annual royalties tied to revenue performance, continued use for Lynn Global, but freedom for me to license it elsewhere. Control over updates and security protocols because I wasn't about to let them sabotage the product just to spite me later. And one more thing, recognition. My name as lead creator publicly acknowledged in all corporate documentation. That last part was non-negotiable. It's fair, Heather said. It gives the company uninterrupted use and allows Ms. Lynn to retain rightful ownership. What's not fair is pretending she didn't build the backbone of your current success. Mom exhaled slowly the way she does when trying not to scream. If we accept this, you undermine the executive order we announced at the gala. You're essentially telling the world your sister didn't earn her role. I gave her a long look. Then maybe the world deserves to know how decisions get made around here. That was the moment her mask cracked. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten. She just blinked like she'd finally seen what I was. Not the quiet little tech daughter. Not the weird one. Not the easy-to-ignore one. A threat. The board called for a short recess. Everyone filed out to review the documents privately, though I knew they were going to huddle and panic. Heather and I stayed seated. I didn't need a break. I needed them to stew in silence. 15 minutes later, they returned. This time, Mr. Reyes spoke up first. He looked over the top of his glasses and addressed the room like we were in a strategy offsite, not a family civil war. I've reviewed Grace's counter, he said. And frankly, it's not just reasonable, it's smart. You don't just own technology now, you lease vision. And unless this company plans to reverse engineer something of equal complexity in under 6 months. Which, let's be clear, is impossible. You're better off aligning with the person who built your future. He paused, let the words land, and they did. One of the older board members nodded. Another, an investor who rarely spoke, raised her hand. I agree. We're treating Grace like a rogue employee when she's clearly the asset we should be investing in. Mom looked like someone had stolen her script. Evie, on the other hand, looked ready to leap across the table. I worked my ass off for this company, she said. Through clenched teeth, just because I don't code doesn't mean I didn't contribute. No one's erasing you, I said. But you weren't the engine, and pretending you were, that's the lie that made all of this necessary. That's when the company's general counsel finally spoke. The legal risk of rejecting Grace's ownership claim is substantial. If she enforces her rights, and she has every tool to do so, we'd not only lose access to Streamline, but potentially breach multiple contracts that rely on its infrastructure. Heather nodded. And if that happens, damages would reach into the high 8 figures, minimum. Another silence. No one wanted to say what we all knew: the company was held together by tech no one else understood. And I held the keys. Then what's your endgame, Mom asked finally. You're clearly not leaving. Do you want control of Lynn Global? I let the question sit. Because honestly, a few days ago the answer would have been no. But standing in that boardroom watching the machine finally acknowledge its invisible engine, I realized I didn't just want justice, I wanted influence. I wanted my work to matter out loud. And if that meant reshaping the entire company to make room for someone like me, so be it. No, I said finally. I want something new. You can keep the logistics arm. The trucks, the warehouses, I'm proposing a spin-off. A new division focused on tech development, Streamline, and what comes next. We license it to Lynn Global, sure. But I run it, independently. Clean board, clean leadership. My vision, not yours. You're dividing the company, Mom said, horror in her voice. I'm modernizing it. Evie scoffed. You're just splitting it because you know you'll never lead this one. I looked her dead in the eye. No, Evie, I'm splitting it because you never saw what I could build. Now I'm giving you a front row seat. To their credit, some of the board nodded. Not just at the plan, but at the clarity of it. I wasn't burning the house down. I was building a new wing and locking the old doors behind me. Mom stood slowly, like her body needed time to accept her own defeat. We'll need 24 hours. Take 12, Heather said. Clock started when you offered the check. We left the room quietly. I didn't gloat. I didn't look back. In the elevator, Heather gave me a half smile. That went better than I expected. Did it? I asked. She shrugged. You didn't cry. That's a win in my book. I almost laughed. Almost. Because the real win wasn't silence, it was leverage. And by tomorrow, it would be legacy. They gave me 12 hours. I needed 6. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit down. I stood at my kitchen counter with a cold mug of tea, watching the city lights blink like warning signs. I wasn't nervous. I was clear. There's something sharp that happens when you stop begging to be seen and start making moves as if you never needed their spotlight in the first place. By midnight, I'd rewritten the proposal with Heather. My own board structure comprised of people who actually understood tech and didn't owe their seat to a dinner party friendship from 1987. Licensing terms that guaranteed Lynn Global access, but on a timer. They'd have 5 years under favorable terms. After that, market rates. Fair, strategic, firm. I wasn't punishing them, I was just making it impossible to forget that I was the reason they had anything worth protecting in the first place. By dawn, I had a business named Streamline Technologies. Not a division, not a subsidiary, a standalone entity, entirely mine. The next morning, the boardroom smelled different, like nerves and apology. No one said it out loud, but the atmosphere had changed. I wasn't just the tech girl anymore, I was the future, and they were running out of ways to delay the inevitable. Mom entered last. Hair, perfect outfit, precise expression, unreadable. The kind of calm that only comes from someone who's spent her whole life negotiating with men twice her size and winning. I recognized the look. I'd just never been on the other side of it before. She stood at the head of the table and cleared her throat. After discussion and counsel, we acknowledged that Grace's proposal for a spin-off is strategically sound. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes refused to meet mine. We're prepared to accept a reorganization plan under the following conditions. ID does. She started listing modifications, cosmetic things, shareholder reporting procedures, shared branding for a transitional period, dual representation at industry conferences. She wanted me to think I was gaining control while she quietly held on to influence. I let her speak. I let her finish. Then I opened my laptop and handed out the final version of my terms. No dual board seats, no shared branding. Anderson Logistics. Sorry, Lynn Global can license the platform, but Anderson Tech will be entirely separate. New board, new advisors, independent hiring. And this I tapped. The clause makes it official, the intellectual property is mine. Permanently, irrevocably. With no provision for forced acquisition under any future merger. Evie's nails tapped the table. That's a hostile split. No, I said calmly, it's liberation. Mom looked around, scanning for support. But Reyes was nodding again, and 2 other board members had already signed off on the side. The tide had turned. She could either drown in it or pretend she was surfing. We accept, she said finally. Just like that. Evie's mouth opened, but she didn't say a word. She looked at me like I was someone new. Maybe I was. Heather leaned over and whispered, "Smile, you just built a kingdom in under 48 hours. I didn't smile, not yet. Because power never feels how you think it will. It doesn't arrive like a parade. It settles in like silence after a long scream. After the meeting, I went back down to the basement one last time. My old lab. I opened the door, looked around at the whiteboard still covered in half-erased formulas and chicken scratch notes from 2 a.m. breakthroughs. There was still a stain on the carpet from the time I spilled boba tea and didn't bother cleaning it right. This was where the revolution started. In a basement alone with no audience and no permission. That felt important. I packed a few things, my notebooks, an old hard drive, a mechanical pencil I'd carried since college. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. Upstairs, the office was buzzing. Word had spread faster than the press release. Employees avoided eye contact. Some nodded. A few smiled. Most looked confused. I didn't blame them. One day, I was the girl fixing their email filters. The next, I was the woman negotiating licensing terms for the tech that kept their paychecks coming. Change is hard. Truth is harder. Evie cornered me by the elevators. She didn't say hello, just folded her arms and glared. "I hope you're happy," she said flat. "You made Mom look weak." "No," I replied. "I made her look wrong. That's not the same." She scoffed. "You think this is over? She'll find a way to control it. You've just started something you can't finish." I met her eyes steady. I started something I don't need permission to finish. She flinched, not visibly, but something shifted in her posture. I'd never spoken to her like that before, not without apology, not without softening the edge. "I never wanted your job," I said, voice calm. "I wanted credit for my work, and now I have something better than a title. I have freedom." She stared at me like she didn't recognize my face. Maybe she didn't. Maybe that was the point. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside without waiting. That afternoon, Heather filed the final documents. Streamline Technologies was now legally separate, fully owned by me with projected Q3 earnings higher than Lynn Global's last fiscal year. The press release dropped 2 hours later. Within minutes, my phone exploded. Tech blogs picked it up. Local business magazines. Even a few national reporters who caught wind of the quiet daughter who broke the corporate mold. The narrative was clean. A young woman reclaims her innovation, spins out a company, disrupts the very structure that tried to contain her. I didn't care about the clicks, but the headlines made one thing clear: they couldn't rewrite the story this time. I controlled the narrative now. At 6:30, I got a call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I played it on speaker as I unpacked in my new office across town. It was Mom. Her voice low measured, too calm to be real. "Grace, I hope you're satisfied. You've made your point. But don't forget you're still an Anderson. Whatever happens next, remember who built the foundation you're standing on." I deleted it without replying, because I didn't need a foundation anymore. I'd already built something taller, and I was just getting started. 6 months later, I stood under the same kind of chandelier that once mocked me. Same city, different room. Same occasion, but this time the lights were on me. No oversized check, no forced smile, just a crystal trophy in one hand and a standing ovation thundering in my ears. The Pacific Northwest Innovation Gala had invited me to deliver the keynote. My name, Grace Lynn, was etched into every program printed across every LED banner. This time I wasn't the tech girl in the corner. I was the headliner. The irony wasn't lost on me. Last year they called me shy. Now I was visionary. That's how fast the world changes when it's forced to see what it used to ignore. I scanned the crowd briefly. Mom was there. So was Evie, sitting at one of the middle tables, not the front. Her posture stiff, her applause minimal. They'd shown up probably for PR optics. Maybe to remind themselves they were still part of the legacy. But they weren't the center of this story anymore. They were side characters. And the spotlight didn't swivel for them now. Streamline Technologies had grown faster than I ever projected. We had 3 major logistics contracts outside Lynn Global, already Europe, Southeast Asia, and a national retailer whose NDA I couldn't break but whose initials were everywhere. We'd just closed Series A funding at a valuation of $480 million. We started with a 6-person dev team. Now we were 38 employees strong, operating out of an industrial chic office downtown that still smelled faintly like paint and new ideas. No more basement, no more shared Wi-Fi with customer service, just clean, autonomous growth. The platform was evolving too. Streamline wasn't just an app anymore, it was becoming a modular ecosystem. Live data visualization, predictive analytics, full AI-driven logistics forecasting. Companies didn't just want to use it, they wanted to build their supply chain around it. I stood at that podium, trophy cool in my hand, and spoke the same way I had in private for years, calm, direct, unshaken. People assume innovation means creating something entirely new, I said. But sometimes it's just seeing a system's potential when everyone else writes it off. And having the nerve to defend what you built even when the room insists you're lucky to be invited. The applause hit hard. Louder than I expected. A few people stood. A few nodded like they knew exactly what I meant. And maybe they did. Especially the ones who'd been in the corner themselves. Especially the ones who were done waiting for permission. Afterward, I worked the room not as a junior, not as a ghost in flats, but as a founder. People approached me, some out of curiosity, some with quiet awe. One woman from a VC fund leaned in and said, "You remind me of someone, me 20 years ago." But smarter. I thanked her. I didn't deflect. I didn't shrink. I simply let the moment land. Heather found me near the bar later. She was wearing a crimson jumpsuit that turned heads the moment she stepped in, but she still looked more amused than impressed. "You made logistics sound sexy," she said. "That's got to be worth at least another $50 million market cap." "Don't tempt me," I replied. She sipped her drink and leaned in. "Your mother's on her second glass of wine and trying not to look like she's unraveling." "She'll be fine," I said. "She always survives, even when she's wrong." Evie hasn't smiled once. "That's her problem." She nodded, pleased. "So what's next?" I looked out at the room. The clusters of suits, the echoes of small talk, the familiar edge of admiration and envy swirling through the air. I could already see the next 10 steps. Streamline 2.0, I said. A full logistics dashboard that learns as it goes. More automation, less guesswork. Maybe even a predictive acquisition module. Heather raised an eyebrow. "That sounds expensive." I smiled. "It will be, and that's the point." I didn't see Mom approach until she was right beside me. She looked tired. Not in the usual overworked way, but in the quiet way people look when they're no longer sure where they fit. She waited for Heather to step away before speaking. "Congratulations," she said. I waited. No sarcasm, no passive aggression. Just that single word. I nodded. "Dad would have been proud," she added. And for the first time in years, I believe she meant it. Not as strategy, not as guilt, just truth. "Thanks," I said. She looked around the room like a tourist in a place she used to own. "You did it fast." "You underestimated how long I'd been ready." There was no reply to that, just silence. Finally, she said, "Are we still family?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a plea. It was a question I'd been circling for months myself. I looked at her for a long time. The woman who gave me a name and then tried to erase the meaning behind it. The woman who built an empire and forgot the basement existed until it came knocking. I said, yes, but that doesn't mean you get a seat at the table. She blinked, nodded once, then walked away. And just like that, the conversation ended without drama. Because sometimes the most painful lines are the ones spoken plainly. Evie didn't speak to me that night. She watched from across the room, surrounded by executives who used to whisper her name with admiration and now said it with uncertainty. Her role at Lynn Global still existed. She still ran the legacy logistics division. But everyone knew the power had shifted. And that kind of change can't be undone by speeches or spreadsheets. It was never about revenge, not really. It was about visibility, about ownership, about not having to ask for what I'd already earned. When I left the gala, I walked into the cool spring air with the kind of peace you only get when you've nothing left to prove. I didn't look back, not once. Streamline Tech would double in size by the end of Q2. We'd onboard a new CTO, someone I handpicked, someone better than me at the engineering, so I could focus on strategy. Leadership wasn't about being the smartest in the room. It was about knowing what to protect and what to delegate. The old version of me thought silence was survival. Now I knew better. Silence was what they counted on to keep me in my place. But the moment I started speaking clearly, without fear, without need, without apology, I realized something beautiful. The world doesn't ignore builders forever. Eventually it listens, boss says. There's a strange stillness after you get everything you fought for. It doesn't feel like fireworks or applause. It feels like standing alone in your office at 9 p.m., barefoot, on polished concrete, looking out over the city you used to think you had to beg to be part of. The window pane hums faintly from the wind outside, and the only sound in the room is the quiet click of a Slack message lighting up on your laptop. It's from one of our new interns, Jules, fresh out of MIT, asking if she can run a code experiment on our logistics AI. I reply yes, then send a note to the CTO to flag it for review. That's leadership now. Quiet approval. Trust with oversight. I built the structure so I didn't have to be in every room. Streamline had become more than software. It was a company, a culture, a rhythm. We weren't just optimizing deliveries, we were redesigning the entire logic of movement. Warehouses that talk to each other. Trucks that reroute based on live conditions without waiting for human lag. We saved companies millions. But what I really cared about, we saved time. The one resource no one gives back. That mattered more than money. Especially now. Mom called twice that week. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that started formal and slid into personal. She wanted a check-in, maybe coffee, maybe a talk. But the truth was, we'd already had all the talks we needed. Some relationships don't end with a door slamming. They just reach their expiration quietly, like fruit left out too long. You walk into the kitchen, see the mold, and you don't scream, you just throw it out. That's what I did with her voice messages. No rage, just a tap and a swipe. Evie, on the other hand, had started showing up in the media again. Interviews about leadership in family businesses and how challenges can strengthen sibling bonds. It was strategic, polished, and completely irrelevant. The industry knew where the real engine was now. One reporter even wrote, Lynn Global is built on tradition, but its survival came from Grace Lynn's disruption. That line stuck with me, not because I needed the validation anymore, but because it was the first time someone saw me without me having to explain myself. We'd been approached by a major logistics conglomerate for acquisition. They offered 9 figures. Heather and I reviewed it over lunch, flipping through the term sheet like it was gossip. We weren't selling, not yet. Maybe not ever. The real power wasn't in the money, it was in knowing we didn't need theirs. And I'd fought too long to build something without strings. One afternoon, I got a visitor at the office. I wasn't expecting anyone. The receptionist pinged me, slightly unsure. She says she's your sister, the message read. I stared at the screen for a second, then typed, send her up. Evie stepped into my office like she was entering a museum she didn't understand. She looked different. Less sharp, more uncertain. Her coat was expensive, but slightly wrinkled, like she'd driven too far or sat too long rehearsing what she might say. I didn't stand to greet her. I was in the area she offered, like we were 2 old friends who'd simply drifted. I raised an eyebrow. I saw your company in that Wired piece, she continued, looking around. It's impressive. I waited. She shifted, uncomfortable. I guess I came to ask how you did it. How I did what I asked. She hesitated. All of it. The split, the confidence. You were always in the background, and now you're everywhere. I stared at her, not unkindly. You think I became this overnight? She didn't answer. I didn't. I was this all along. You just didn't look closely enough. She swallowed, and for a second, I saw the sister I'd once admired. Not the polished executive, but the girl who used to help me sneak candy into our rooms and played dumb when Mom questioned the missing wrappers. "I didn't know how to protect you back then," she said suddenly. "And when you stepped up, I panicked. I thought you'd replace me." I exhaled slowly. "You were never the one I wanted to replace." Evie nodded quietly. "I'm sorry, Grace. I know it's late, but I am." The thing about apologies is they don't rewind the clock. They just place a stone in the river, a place to step forward if you want to. I didn't hug her. I didn't cry. I just nodded once. "Thank you," I said. She turned to leave, then paused. "Would you ever come back to Lynn Global, maybe as a board member?" I smiled faintly. "You don't need me there, and I don't need to go back to where I had to fight to be heard." She didn't push, just nodded. "Well, if you ever change your mind." "I won't," I said gently. When she left, I stood at the window again, watching her car disappear into traffic. No anger, no grief, just quiet release. That weekend, I walked through Pike Place with my headphones in, listening to a podcast one of our interns had recommended. I passed a bookstore and ducked inside. Not because I needed anything, just because I could. That freedom, the ability to move through the world without shrinking, was the real win. A little girl pointed at a magazine on the rack and said, "That's the app lady." Her dad laughed, pulled it down and said, "Smartest CEO in Seattle, huh?" I didn't say anything. Didn't introduce myself. I just smiled and kept walking. Let them have the moment. Back home, I lit a candle, sat with a pen in my journal. The last page was still blank. I wrote, "They gave her the crown, but I built the kingdom, and now I make the rules." Then I closed the book. Story 2, I used $850,000 of my own funds to rescue our vineyard. My sister was then appointed CEO by my parents. I then reclaimed everything and established my own wine business. Greetings from our yearly harvest festival. At River's Edge Vineyard, my father made an announcement, his voice echoing through the adorned barn. "A fascinating new chapter in our family's history begins today. It gives us great pleasure to inform that Andrea, who just earned her MBA, will be taking over as CEO." I sat motionless with my wine glass halfway to my lips as the audience erupted in cheers. I had moved all of my life money to keep this vineyard from going into foreclosure 6 months ago. I now saw my younger sister, who had never spent a day in the fields, come up looking stunning in her beautiful clothing. I'm Jessica, and I'm 35 years old. Without ever asking my parents for assistance, I started my investment consultancy business from the ground up and saw it grow into a profitable enterprise. I worked 60-hour weeks and learned the true meaning of achievement while Andrea's parents paid for her MBA. That's why I instantly sent $850,000 of my whole life savings when they contacted me in tears about the bank's foreclosure notice 6 months earlier. They said, "We're family. We have faith in one another." My father went on to mention her business education and new outlook. River's Edge will enter a new phase of innovation and expansion under Andrea's direction. She possesses the ideal blend of academic schooling and knowledge of our family's history. I watched as Andrea reveled in the praise. The same sister who, instead of studying soil composition or fermentation methods, had devoted her undergraduate years to sharing pictures from vineyard photo shoots. The same sister who was unable to distinguish between our Merlot and Cabernet. Last Christmas, in a blind tasting, my mom gave me a gentle pat on the arm. "I hope you get it, honey Jessica. Andrea is the obvious candidate to manage the business side because of her degree." I smiled warmly as I interrupted her. "Naturally. Andrea will do well, Mom." Even though my chest was getting cold, I held my voice steady as I raised my glass and made a toast. To River's Edge's new CEO. I excused myself, took my phone out into the cold evening air, and scrolled to a contact I didn't think I'd need. I had met the aggressive corporate lawyer Rachel Thompson at a number of wine business gatherings. "Regarding a family business issue, I need your assistance. Are you available to meet tomorrow?" I texted you. She answered right away. 10 a.m. at my workplace. Bring any supporting paperwork you may have. Rachel's office had a view of downtown Dallas with the steel and glass towers glinting in the early sun. Sitting opposite me, she went over the bank statements that showed that I had transferred $850,000 to the River's Edge Vineyards account. She looked up from the papers and said, "Let me clarify this. Without a formal contract or even a promissory note, you moved all of your life savings." I said, "They're my family." When they contacted regarding the foreclosure notice, the words now taste nasty. Saving our legacy was all I could think about. Because they had over-leveraged the property for Andrea's MBA program and a new tasting room she insisted they needed, 3 generations of winemaking were on the verge of being lost. Rachel reclined in her seat. "She has now been appointed CEO, preserving the vineyard in spite of your investment." After pausing, she continued, "Describe the day you made the money transfer. What precisely were they promising?" I closed my eyes and recalled that frantic call. "I'll take care of that," Dad said. "My position in the family business would be guaranteed by my investment." As she talked about how they would make it up to me, Mom was crying. With a rise in anger, I opened my eyes. Rather, they are behaving as though my contribution was merely a daughter's obligation. Were these conversations observed by anyone? Rachel inquired. "Yes," I said, straightening my posture. When I went to set up the transfer, their accountant Michael was present. He repeatedly suggested that we put something in writing, but he seemed uneasy about the whole thing. My parents threw him out, claiming it would be a betrayal of the family's confidence. Rachel's eyes shone brightly. Michael might be of great assistance. However, we must first ascertain your desired result. Would you like to run the vineyard? I gave a head shake. I want interest on my investment returned. Give Andrea the title of CEO. I'll use my money to launch my own vineyard, one with which they will have to contend. Excellent, Rachel grinned, since I have a strategy. Verbal fraud is what your parents did. These bank documents and Michael's testimony will help us make a compelling case. However, we will send a demand letter first rather than filing right away, one that describes in detail how their conduct might be seen as intentional financial manipulation. She took out a notebook. Within 30 days, we require that you return your $850,000 plus 8% annual interest. We'll also ask for all of your investments' financial records. After they received your money, I'm sure they made some intriguing decisions. A burden was lifted from my shoulders. Additionally, we file a lawsuit to expose their books to public scrutiny if they refuse. I have a feeling that your sister's MBA hasn't equipped her to handle that kind of crisis. At River's Edge, the demand letter landed like a bomb. Andrea called me while I was working from my flat, her voice shrill with panic. A lawsuit. Are you crazy? Everything our family has worked so hard to build will be destroyed by you. She let out a scream. You're to blame for Dad's chest pains. I kept my cool and let her vent. The answer is straightforward. Return my $850,000 investment plus 8% interest over a 6-month period. Andrea, you have an MBA. The maths is within your grasp. This vineyard was saved with that money, your heritage as well. And now you want to take it back by bankrupting us? She paused, her tone shifting to one of cunning. Additionally, your fancy lawyer ought to be aware of the complexity of family businesses and verbal agreements. Nothing can be proven by you. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Actually, I just got off the phone with Michael. Remember him? Your accountant. He's given a sworn statement about the day I made the transfer, about how he advised putting our agreement in writing, and how Dad promised me a secured place in the business. The line went silent for a moment. Then hold on. Dad wants to talk to you. My father's voice came through, strained and angry. Jessica, what are you doing to us after everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me? I cut him off. Let's talk about that. While you paid for Andrea's education, her MBA, her car, her apartment, I created my own life. You promised me a future here in return for preserving the vineyard, and that was the only thing I ever asked for. You were never promised control. Andrea is qualified for this. I am no longer requesting control. Once more, I interrupted. I want my money returned, money that you took with a clear plan for its use. His voice grew softer as he changed strategies. My dear, be sensible. At the moment, the vineyard lacks that type of liquid capital. We would need to get another loan. Then you should start corresponding with banks. I'll file a lawsuit against you in 25 days. Additionally, Dad, every financial choice made since my investment, including the purchase of the new Mercedes, will be closely examined. Andrea's driving and the trip to Tuscany you and your mother took last month. In the background, I could hear hushed conversation. Then Mom answered the phone. Please, Jessica. She pleaded. Join us for dinner. As a family, we can discuss this. Mom, we're not family at the moment. In a dispute, we are business associates. Give Rachel a call from your attorney with your answer. My hands were trembling a little as I hung up. Messages from family members ranging from irate accusations to requests for peace instantly flooded my phone. Disregarding them all, I launched my laptop, investigating potential vineyard properties in the upcoming county. River's Edge would soon face some fierce rivalry. I had an unexpected revelation the following week. I got a call for coffee from Michael, the accountant. There was urgency in his voice. He came with a thick folder, and we met at a quiet cafe outside the vineyard. Something needs to be seen by you. Before moving the folder across the table, he said, looking around anxiously, "Since your investment, I have been reviewing the books. The figures don't add up. I discovered thorough financial records when I opened the folder." Michael indicated a number of the entries that were highlighted. Not only did your $850 to $1,000 keep the vineyard from going into foreclosure, additionally, it provided funding for a number of personal expenses that were recorded as business expenses. The brand new Mercedes was registered as a delivery car. The trip to Tuscany was classified as market research. Parts of Andrea's MBA were backdated to his employee education costs. My hands gripped my coffee cup more tightly. For all of this, they used my investment. Michael gave a somber nod. "There's more. River's Edge Holdings, LLC, a new company, was registered 2 weeks prior to Andrea's appointment as CEO. You invested in the original vineyard company, and they have been covertly moving its assets to this new organization. It is being depleted." The realization was like a kick to the stomach. They weren't simply ignoring what I had to say. They were making every effort to prevent me from making any claims. Soon the vineyard I had rescued would be nothing more than a shell. "This needs to be seen by your lawyer," Michael said, his voice lowering. "But I didn't give it to you. I've already started looking for a new job. This type of financial manipulation is not something I can be linked to." My phone buzzed with an Andrea text before I could reach for it to call Rachel. "Tonight is a family meeting. Don't bring your attorney along. This is your last chance to correct it." Similar to family. I showed the text to Michael. He gave a headshake. "They must have realized I was studying the documents. They will either threaten me or try to persuade you to give in." I answered, recalling similar family gatherings when I was a kid, and Andrea had gotten into mischief. Our parents had always managed to place the blame elsewhere, accusing me of being irrational for failing to protect my sister. I responded to the text. "Any conversation must take place with solicitors present." Andrea responded right away. "You have a choice. But when things get ugly, don't come crying." I gave Rachel a call and emailed her pictures of Michael's paperwork. I could tell everything from the sharp intake of breath she took. She said, "This is just what I was looking for." Numerous financial irregularities have been committed by them. We are no longer merely discussing a civil lawsuit. Criminal charges could result from this. I said hastily, "I don't want them in jail. All I want is my money back." After that, we employ this as leverage. I'm writing a revised demand letter that gives them 48 hours rather than 30 days to return your money plus interest or risk an SEC investigation. They have the option. Long after Michael had hung up, I sat in the cafe and stared at the damning documents. I felt bad about what this might do to my family. But there's more. There was a somber sense of fulfillment in the part that recalled every rejection, every instance in which they had given preference to Andrea, and every sacrifice I had made in order to assist them. My sister and parents' increasingly panicked messages continued to buzz through my phone. I chose to ignore them all and accessed the real estate listing on my laptop. Just across the valley from the river's edge, Marshall Creek is 200 acres of prime vineyard land that I had been eyeing. It had perfect soil composition, great sun exposure, and most importantly, a clear view of my family's vineyard. On harvest day, the revised demand letter struck with more force than a hailstorm. My father stormed into my flat while I was in the middle of a virtual tour of the Marshall Creek property, brandishing the letter as if it were a white flag of surrender. "Criminal accusations," his face wheezed. "Go through your own family. I'm a better parent than this." I reduced the size of the browser window that displayed the south-facing slopes of Marshall Creek. "Did you bring me up to tolerate robbery? Because you did just that. I took my $850,000 and spent it on vacations in Italy and fancy cars, while preparing to shut me out of the company." I interrupted him, but we never intended for him to start. "Keep it. I've seen the asset transfers, the new LLC, the financial records, everything. You didn't simply turn on me, you made an effort to prevent me from retaliating." I got up and spoke steadily. "You still have 40 hours to reimburse my investment plus interest, or Rachel submits all of the information to the SEC. His face turned pale from red. "You ruined the future for your sister. She was recently appointed CEO, the future of Andrea." I gave a sour laugh. "How about mine? She was sharing pictures from business school on Instagram when I made that money. You assured me that the money would guarantee my position in the family business." "There is still something we can do," he begged. "In a leadership arrangement, Andrea might be able to share the CEO role." I gave a headshake. "Andrea and I don't want to share leadership. I want my money returned. Interest is added to every penny. After that, you won't ever have to be concerned about me challenging your valued CEO." The word competitive caused his eyes to narrow. What does that signify? At that moment, my phone began to buzz. Marshall Creek was being handled by the real estate agent. The timing was ideal. I responded on the speaker. "Hello, Jessica. Fantastic news. Your offer has the owner's full attention. They adore your plan to increase the vineyard's output. When is a good time to meet and talk about terms?" As I realized, I saw my father's face fall apart. Marshall Creek wasn't a typical piece of land. It was the edge of a river. Primary rivalry. Before the owner retired and let the vines go, their wine had continuously won more accolades when my grandfather was in charge. "You wouldn't," he muttered. "Wouldn't it? I'm going to start my own vineyard. Compete with the company that stole from me by utilizing my experience." Dad, Grandpa, and everything else taught me about winemaking. Andrea was studying business cases at the time. I was researching weather patterns and soil samples. Your grandfather would feel embarrassed. Trying a final emotional jab, he said. He would be proud? No. Feeling proud, I won't allow you and Andrea's avarice to ruin his legacy. I returned my attention to my laptop. I have a property to purchase TikTok on that 40-hour period, if you don't mind. Without saying another word, he slammed the door behind him and walked out. My phone was inundated with Andrea's messages in a matter of minutes. "You have no right to threaten Dad in this way. You're simply envious of my accomplishments. You're the reason Mom is crying." After blocking her number, I went back to the Marshall Creek listing and saw that although it needed some work, the property had potential. More significantly, I could make wines that would directly compete with River's Edge's bestsellers, thanks to its premium grapes and higher elevation. Once more, my phone buzzed. Rachel. "They're scrambling this time," she said. "Their lawyer called me just now. They appear to be attempting to obtain an emergency loan." I grinned. In any case, I prevailed. I either received Marshall Creek or my money back. Additionally, River's Edge would experience the true essence of competition. 12 hours remain before the deadline. My mom arrived at my workplace. She wore the same expression she'd worn as a child trying to mediate disputes between Andrea and me, and she carried a thick manila envelope. She said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "Your father's had to be sedated. He had extremely high blood pressure. Are you content now?" I maintained a neutral expression. "Mom, what's in the envelope?" She moved it over my desk. "Our best effort. All of our assets have been mortgaged. This sum is $600,000. The bank would only give us that. The remaining amount can be paid in installments." I kept my hands off the envelope. The deal wasn't that. $850,000 plus interest. Everything. Alternatively, Rachel files early tomorrow. We don't possess it. Her act of being a peacemaker crumbled as she snapped. "Andrea has been phoning all of Texas banks. Without wanting to audit the books, no one will give us more. And given what they would discover, we can't permit that right now." I inquired subtly about things like how you've been concealing assets in that new LLC, and how you utilized my investment to fund Andrea's MBA rather than preserving the vineyard. Mom's expression froze. "How did you? I have copies of all of it." "Mom, each and every transfer transaction and fraudulent business expense? You really believe that nobody would notice?" Leaning forward, she changed her strategy. "Consider what you are doing. If those documents are filed, it will not only harm us, the reputation of the vineyard will suffer. Every individual who relies on us for their livelihood. The distributors, the employees, and their families. To get even with your sister, you ruined them all. You have no right to put this on me." I spoke in a harsh tone. "As soon as you decided to steal my money, you and your father made this decision. It's not me who jeopardizes everyone's jobs, but you." She started, "We didn't steal." However, I interrupted her. "I'll show you something." I rotated my laptop so that the Marshall Creek real estate listing was visible. Lovely. Is it not superior soil, ideal altitude, and sufficient land to double the river's boundaries? Capacity for production. Unless I receive my money back first, the owner will accept my offer tomorrow morning. Mom recognized the property and her eyes grew wide. "That land is not yours. We would be destroyed. Then within the next 11 hours, I advise you and Andrea to use your imagination. Call in favors, mortgage the house, and sell her Mercedes. I want every penny returned regardless of how you go about it." She got up unsteadily. "Jessica, you've changed. You've hardened." "Cruel." "No, Mother. I simply no longer allow you to control me, the lawsuit, or the money. Now those are your only choices." I called Rachel to give her an update after she left. They made an effort to bargain. I informed her and made a partial payment offer. "Remain firm," she said. "They're desperate based on what I've been told. All day long their lawyer has been phoning banks. At that moment, I received a fresh email from the Marshall Creek realtor owner who was eager to close. Can get together tomorrow morning to sign documents. I confirmed the meeting with a smile and a letter. I then sent Andrea a text. There are 11 hours remaining. Talk. She responded right away. You're making a grave error. We could spend years in court according to Dad's attorney. I returned one picture. The view from the top of Marshall Creek. Main Vineyard looks down over the river's edge. She would be familiar with it from all of her Instagram photo sessions. She replied with a series of irate emojis. I had them precisely where I wanted them, and time was running out. The deadline is just 2 hours away. I sat in Rachel's office going over the Marshall Creek purchase agreement and the SEC filing the final documents for both cases. The sky was tinted red as the sun descended over Dallas. I was reminded of our Cabernet by that. Rachel checked her messages and reported that their lawyers had called 4 times in the past hour. They're rushing. James Turner from First Regional Bank has been attempting to get in touch with you too. I straightened my posture. Andrea's college boyfriend James Turner broke up with her because he was too demanding. He was a loan officer now. Michael, the accountant who called the emergency board meeting at River's Edge, texted me before I could reply. In the loo, Andrea is crying. If your father doesn't correct this, your mother is threatening to reveal something about him. Chaos reigns. When I called James, he picked up right away. According to him, there are significant anomalies in the Vineyard's records. Without a thorough audit, I am unable to grant their urgent loan request. However, there is an alternative. A bank that wants to put money into family-run wineries. Your parents would receive more than just a loan, but they would demand complete transparency. I sent my dad a text. A solution exists, one that's not about the SEC or me. Give First Regional's James Turner a call. You have 90 minutes. Andrea's reaction was immediate. Do you believe that a bank taking over is preferable to family? The legacy of Grandpa is being destroyed by you. As Andrea played on her phone, I reflected on our grandfather and the hours he had spent teaching me about the vines. I kept thinking about his final words. Jesse fancy degrees are irrelevant to the grapes. They value hard work and love. Rachel said softly, there's an hour left. Now what Michael's updates increased in frequency as the last half hour approached. Your father is working with the bank to review documents. 3 loan officers were contacted by Andreas. Your mom has used half of the tissues in the box. I waited with my phone close at hand. Now the $850,000 was about more than just money. It was about holding them accountable for their deeds. Rachel prepared both sets of paperwork while working silently across from me. Then my phone showed my father's number. He stated that the bank wants complete authority over financial choices for a period of 5 years. He spoke in a rough voice, plus 2 seats on the board. We would have strangers to answer to. Strangers are preferable to thieves. I gave a chilly response. There are 20 minutes remaining. This is if we allow the bank to take control. Will you put everything else aside? No competing vineyard, no sick? I leaned forward and made a bank sign. I'll walk away if you return my investment plus interest. You won't ever have to be concerned about me competing with Andrea, who is so precious. He remained silent for a while. According to your mother, we ought to call your bluff. Claims you won't actually submit a filing to the SEC. You're too tender. I said TikTok, and it took 15 minutes to find out. I turned to Rachel after hanging up. Prepare the SEC documentation. However, my phone buzzed with an email from James Turner before she could grab the file. Signed document with the subject line, my parents' signatures on the bank agreement, and a confirmation of the $850,000 transfer plus interest to my account were included in the attached file. According to Rachel, it appears that they put survival before pride. I pulled up the number of the real estate agent as soon as I nodded. They were selling the vineyard across the valley from Marshall Creek. Reduced cost, 2 improved water rights. After 2 months, I was standing on Sunset Valley Vineyard, my recently acquired property with its rich soil and ideal western exposure. An added bonus was the view of River's Edge across the valley. After hearing my plans, investors would be willing to support my venture, and I would use the $850,000 that was returned as a down payment. The day after the bank took over, Michael quit his job at River's Edge, and I hired him right away to be my CFO. Andrea is losing her mind. He said he looked at his phone. Her proposal for a new tasting room was turned down by the bank, which cited needless costs and the importance of wine quality. Recalling the bank's first board meeting, I grinned. They had canceled the wine tasting tours in Italy and swapped the Mercedes for a more useful truck. Real financial oversight was outperforming Andrea's MBA. I chose to ignore my mother's weekly texts about mending the family. I hadn't heard from my father since we signed the bank contract, but last week, I got a package that had more meaning than they could ever express. Grandpa's handwritten notes on grape varieties, weather patterns, and soil composition were preserved in his old leather-bound notebook. This belongs to someone who recognizes its worth, the enclosed note stated simply. Dad. 3 years from now, these grapes would yield their first vintage, and I was holding that notebook among my recently acquired vines. River's Edge would be my direct rival in 5 years, but I no longer required their approval. I had something superior. I have to leave my own legacy. Are you prepared to plant? Michael pointed to the workers who were waiting with the new rootstock as he asked. Grandpa's notebook was tucked into my jacket. We should prepare some wine. Story 3. My sister, who deceived me, was secretly invited to my wedding by my parents. I had to tell them the truth and finally leave them because of her nasty toast. The faint sting of comparison taints my earliest memories. Why are you unable to be as gregarious as your sister? As I sat reading in my corner and Katie delighted guests with her dramatic tales, Mom would shake her head and say, "She was 6 and I was 8, and the pattern was established already. Why don't you join the discussion?" Emily Honey Dad would offer encouragement, but it was in a tone of disappointment rather than encouragement. Katie, meanwhile, would be sitting on his knee and making everyone laugh with her goofy jokes and animated facial expressions. Favoritism extended beyond minor details. It manifested itself in every area of our lives. Katie received brand new pink tutus and the priciest shoes when she began ballet lessons at the age of 7. A year later, when I requested to join band class, my mother found me a used flute on eBay and complained about the cost. One Christmas in particular, when I was 12, comes to mind. In order to aid with my academic work, I had been hoping for a new laptop. Rather, Katie got an iPhone and I got some books and clothes. Even though he's only 10, to keep in contact with all of her friends, she needs it. While I swallowed my objections about needing the laptop for my advanced placement classes, Mom provided justification. During those endless summers when my parents took Katie on family vacations without me, my grandmother Dad's mother was the only one who seemed to see me for who I was. Grandma Martha would extend a warm welcome to me in her modest yet comfortable home. They're abandoning me once more. One day I watched them pack the car for another trip to Disney World and complained while fighting back tears. Grandma whispered their loss to me as she drew me in. My dear, we'll go on our own adventure, you and I. By teaching me how to make her famous apple pie and sharing stories about her own early years, she always made those forgotten summers extra special. When I was 15 years old, I heard my parents conversing in the kitchen one evening. After spending hours studying for my tests, I had taken a break to grab a glass of water. We must begin to consider how we will pay for college. Mom responded matter-of-factly to Dad's statement that we could only afford to send one of them. Katie has so much potential in drama club that she might succeed in the performing arts. How about Emily? Dad inquired, but his tone was unconvinced. Emily is intelligent. She will find a solution. She might be eligible for scholarships. As their words sank in, I stood there with my glass forgotten. For me, that night was a turning point. I would have to invest in my future on my own if they didn't. I then threw myself into every academic opportunity available, including debate clubs, science fairs, and math competitions. While Katie was dating boys from her middle school class, I took part in all of them. I was working on my college applications and making presentations while staying up late. You're just envious of your sister's social life, Emily. Every time I attempted to point out that Katie's boy-crazy behavior seemed out of character for a 14-year-old, Mom would respond. Reminding myself that all of this effort would eventually pay off, I would withdraw to my room while holding my academic medals and certificates. I'd create a life one day in which I wouldn't have to fight for attention or love. First, I had to make it through high school. Finally, all of the late nights spent studying and competing in every academic event paid off. I received a full scholarship to State University's School of Business Management after graduating as my high school valedictorian. I rushed to show my parents the day I received my acceptance letter, but they were occupied getting Katie ready for her most recent date. It felt like a breath of fresh air when I moved into the dorm. Sarah, my flatmate, turned into the sister I had always desired. Someone who genuinely supported my objectives and acknowledged my accomplishments. Rather than feeling lonely, being apart from my family felt liberating. There was a consistent pattern to the infrequent phone calls home. Katie is seeing the football team's captain. Right now, without even inquiring about my classes, Mom would gush. She is very well liked. She is adored by all. Do you have a partner, Emily? I would mumble something about concentrating on my studies and cut the call short. In actuality, I was flourishing. My work ethic was commended by my professors, and I was forming genuine friendships with people who accepted me for who I was. Then the bomb went off in my third year. While on one of our rare family calls, Mom mentioned in passing, Katie was accepted to Prestige University, by the way. We're overjoyed to have found her the most adorable flat close to campus. The view is worth seeing. All the costs are being covered by your father and me. Naturally, we want her to concentrate on her education without having to worry about money. I sat there in my cramped dorm room, phone pressed to my ear, fighting back tears of anger and hurt. The same parents who couldn't afford to help me with college were now fully funding Katie's education at one of the most expensive universities in the country. But I channeled that anger into determination. I graduated with honors and landed a job at Mitchell & Associates, one of the top consulting firms in the city. 2 years of working my ass off earned me a promotion to senior consultant. The night of the announcement, my colleagues insisted on taking me out to celebrate at the Blue Room, a trendy bar downtown. That's where I met James. He was charming, successful, and actually interested in hearing about my career. We exchanged numbers, and soon we were dating. For 2 years, everything felt perfect. James made me feel valued and loved, something I never really experienced with my family. Then came the wedding invitation from Katie. She was marrying Richard Thompson III, some hotshot real estate developer she'd met at college. I almost didn't go, but James convinced me it would look worse if I didn't attend. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect. Over the top and excessive. Katie practically floated around in her designer gown, making sure everyone knew she was becoming Mrs. Thompson before her big sister had even gotten engaged. I always knew I'd be first down the aisle, she smirked, when we had our obligatory sister moment at the reception. I mean, you were always so focused on your career and everything, but don't worry. Maybe someday you'll find someone too. I plastered on my best fake smile and sipped my champagne, reminding myself that her approval didn't matter anymore. I had a good job, a loving boyfriend, and a life I'd built entirely on my own terms. A year after Katie's wedding, James and I were living together in a cozy apartment downtown. One night after making dinner together, he got down on one knee in our tiny kitchen and took out a ring. My heart soared. I said yes and practically jumped into his arms. The ring wasn't as flashy as Katie's massive diamond, but it was perfect for me. Elegant and understated. When I called my parents to share the news, Mom's response was predictably lukewarm. "Oh, that's nice, dear. We should meet him properly. Bring him over this weekend." The meeting was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd expected. Katie showed up uninvited, of course, wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than our monthly rent. "So, you finally found someone willing to marry you," she said with that familiar condescending smile. "I was starting to worry you'd end up alone with your spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations." James squeezed my hand under the table, helping me keep my cool. To my surprise, Mom and Dad seemed to warm up to him during dinner. "We should host your engagement party," Mom suddenly announced. "We'll handle everything. It's the least we can do, considering we couldn't contribute to your education." The casual way she mentioned their financial favoritism made my blood boil. But James looked so excited about the idea that I agreed. 2 months later, we drove back to my parents' house for the party. They had actually done a nice job with the decorations, and seeing all our relatives gathered to celebrate us made me think that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. Katie showed up alone, explaining that Richard was away on business. She kept making snide comments about my dress being budget-friendly and how she could recommend a better wedding planner than the one we were considering. The party was in full swing when I realized I hadn't seen James for a while. "Has anyone seen my fiancé?" I asked, but everyone was too busy enjoying themselves to pay attention. Something felt off. I started searching through the house, eventually heading upstairs. As I approached my old bedroom, I heard noises that made my stomach drop. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open, and there they were. James and Katie tangled in the sheets of my childhood bed. "Emily, wait, I can explain." James scrambled to get dressed, his face red with either shame or exertion. I couldn't tell which. Katie didn't even bother covering herself properly. She just lay there with that smug smile I'd known my entire life. "Oh, Emily," she purred. "James just figured out what I've known all along. I'm the better sister. Always have been. Always will be." My hands were shaking so badly I had to lean against the doorframe. 28 years of being second best. And now this. I opened my mouth to scream, to finally let out decades of hurt and rage. But before I could, Mom and Dad burst into the room. Obviously having heard the commotion, Mom took one look at the scene and burst into tears. "Emily, sweetie, please." She grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "You can't tell anyone about this. Think about your sister." Dad joined in his face, ashen. "If Richard finds out about this, he'll divorce her. There's a prenup. She won't get a penny. Please, Emily, think about what this would do to the family." I stared at them in disbelief. Even now, even after catching my fiancé in bed with my married sister, their only concern was protecting Katie. "Please, baby, I'm so sorry." James was fully dressed now, reaching for me. It was a mistake. She came on to me and I yanked my arm away from his grasp. The clarity that washed over me in that moment was almost peaceful without a word. I turned and walked downstairs to where our guests were still celebrating everyone. I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. "I have an announcement to make. There will not be a wedding. I'm very sorry for any inconvenience this may cause, especially to those who traveled to be here today. Please enjoy the food and drinks. But I need to leave now." Ignoring the gasps and whispers, I grabbed my purse and car keys. I could hear James calling after me. I could see my mother's mascara-streaked face pleading with me, but I didn't stop. The drive home was a blur. As soon as I got to my apartment, I went into autopilot mode. I pulled out every cardboard box we had stored in the closet and methodically packed up James's belongings, clothes, books, his precious golf clubs. Everything that was his went into boxes. I drove to the nearest storage facility, rented a unit, and dropped off all his things. Then I sent him one final text with the unit number and access code before blocking his number, his email, and all his social media accounts. My phone kept buzzing with messages from my parents, warnings about family loyalty, pleas to keep quiet about what happened, guilt trips about how this would destroy Katie's marriage. I blocked their numbers too. That night, while sitting by myself in my partially vacant flat, I came to a realization. There was more to this than James's treachery. This was the result of my family always picking Katie over me. I had finally had enough of them choosing her happiness over mine. I poured a glass of wine for myself and erased Katie's email address. Next, my parents. I felt really free for the first time in my life. When you least expect it, life has a funny way of surprising you. I literally ran into Michael at a local market 3 years after the disastrous engagement while getting coffee. Rather than becoming upset when my coffee spilt all over his white shirt, he laughed and asked if I would like him to buy me another one. I paused. I had vowed to stop dating after James and focus entirely on my career. However, Michael was different in some way. Perhaps it was his sincere smile or the fact that he didn't make a big effort to win my approval. Observing my hesitation, he joked, "I swear I'm not a serial killer. Just a clumsy architect who wants to get your number and possibly replace your coffee." "Just coffee," I firmly said. However, that coffee eventually evolved into dinner, which in turn led to additional dates. Michael didn't push. He recognized my problems with trust. He allowed our relationship to grow at my own pace after I eventually told him about James and Katie. No rushing, no big gestures, just respect and care. He asked her to marry him on a calm evening at home 2 years later. No audience, no fancy restaurant, only us. A simple yet lovely ring and some Chinese takeaway. Without hesitation, I said yes. My initial reaction was to say no when his parents, Tom and Linda, insisted on hosting a lavish wedding for us. However, they were truly thrilled to have me join their family. Insisting on covering the cost herself, Linda even took me shopping for a wedding gown. First, I invited Grandma Martha. Through it all, she had been my pillar of support. Next were my cousins, aunts, and uncles who had always shown me true love. However, my parents' question was a major concern. I debated for weeks before I finally answered the phone. "It's Emily, Mom." "Emily." She sounded both happy and shocked. "Aunt Sarah told us about your engagement. We had hope to invite you and your father to the wedding I'm calling." Before I lost my composure, I interrupted. "We would love to come, my dear. Have Richard and Katie received an invitation? Your sister would want to attend, you know." "No," I said firmly, gripping the phone tighter, "and I will not be inviting her. When she slept with my fiancé during my engagement party, she forfeited that privilege. I might add, while she was married. I anticipated the typical outcry and justifications for Katie's actions. On the other end of the queue, however, there was only silence. "Next month is the wedding," I said, maintaining a steady tone. "I will email you the information." My wedding day got off to a great start. The location looked stunning. Every little detail had been lovingly and carefully handled by Michael's family, and I felt like a princess in my gown. However, as soon as I entered the reception area, that ideal bubble popped. Katie, in a form-fitting dress that flaunted her figure, was standing beside our parents. Clearly a pregnant belly. She had the audacity to wink at me, and her smile was the same smug one I'd seen in my former bedroom 3 years prior. Richard, her spouse, is standing beside her. With my hands shaking with anger, I marched directly to my parents. "Why is she in this place?" I gave a hiss. I made it clear that she was not invited. "Now, Emily," Mom said condescendingly, "I knew so well. You're acting absurdly. Your sister is named Katie. She must attend your wedding, of course. Years have passed since that regrettable incident. It's time to forgive and move on." My entire world began to spin. Then Michael's hand touched mine and gave me a light squeeze. I was grounded by his touch, which served as a reminder that this was our day and I wouldn't allow them to spoil it. I inhaled deeply before leaving, concentrating on the fact that I was getting married to the most amazing man I had ever met. After a flawless ceremony, we arrived at the reception. Before the toast started, everything was good. Mom got up first holding a glass. She grinned at the audience and remarked, "I'm so happy that my second daughter has finally found her match." However, it goes without saying that Katie was the first person to walk down the aisle. You two have shared everything and have always been so close. She hardly mentioned Michael or me as she talked endlessly about Katie's marriage, wedding, and pregnancy. I held my champagne glass tightly, fearing it would break. Linda, Michael's mother, came over and gave me a pitying pat on the knee. However, the worst was still to come. Next, Katie got to her feet, draping her dress over her growing tummy. She began utterly disregarding the fact that I hardly ever attended her wedding, much less participated in it when she was maid of honor at my own. I've always looked out for Emily, and she's always looked up to me. Actually, I prevented her from making a grave error a few years ago. She gave me a knowing glance as she paused for dramatic effect. For that she owes me. Really, I have always acted in her best interests. I was infuriated by her words' sheer boldness, which turned her betrayal into a kind of sisterly favor. In fact, she was boasting about having slept with my ex-fiancé while she was at my wedding, to which she was not even invited. It was more than I could handle. With my champagne glass still in hand, I stood up, my hands shaking but my resolve unwavering. "What do you know? Allow me to share a story with you all." Despite my heart pounding, I spoke in a strong, clear voice. "Yes, I genuinely adore Michael. He's the greatest thing I've ever experienced. I've learned what true love and support look like thanks to him. However, I was engaged to another man a few years ago. As Katie said, we held our engagement party at my parents' house. I went on to explain the party that she so obligingly omitted. The specifics. There was silence in the room. A look of uncertainty that I had never seen on Katie's face before started to replace her smug smile. While her husband was away on business, my dear sister, who was married at the time I might add, made the decision to woo my fiancé during that party. In my childhood bedroom, I discovered her in bed with the man I was to marry. The same bedroom where I spent countless nights studying to earn my own way through college, while our parents paid for her apartment at that prestigious university. The reception hall reverberated with gasps. The stunned silence was broken by the sound of cutlery clattering against plates. Katie's husband Richard rose slowly, his face pallid, his knuckles white as he held onto the table's edge. Is this accurate? Katie's perfectly crafted composure finally cracked. Her mascara began to run as tears welled up in her eyes. "Yes, but Richard, I can explain. That wasn't the case." Richard turned and walked out of the reception hall without another word, his steps echoing in the stunned silence. Katie ran after him, her pregnant belly making her awkward as she rushed through the door, calling his name desperately. "Emily!" Mom screamed, her face contorted with rage, her carefully styled hair coming loose as she jumped to her feet. "How dare you? You've ruined everything. Why couldn't you just say nothing as you usually do?" "You had to cause a stir at your own wedding, but why?" I calmly replied, "No, Mom." Feeling strangely at ease now that the truth was out. "When you brought her here, you ruined everything. I made it clear that she wasn't invited. Each time you favored her over me, you destroyed everything. When you stood up for her after she betrayed me in the most horrible way, you destroyed everything. This is simply the result of your decisions. I'm finally catching up with everyone." After Richard and Katie left, our parents hurried out as well. "They're furious," they muttered as they walked out of the hall. There was a brief hush in the reception hall as the tension was palpable. Michael then got to his feet and grasped my hand. His touch was comforting and soft. Well, his eyes were warmly smiling as he spoke. "I think we were celebrating our wedding at the time. Do you want to dance?" First, Aunt Sarah began to clap, then Grandma Martha, then Michael's family, and finally the entire room was cheering. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Linda whispered as she gave me a tight hug. "You made the correct decision." While enjoying my honeymoon in Hawaii with Michael, I kept a safe distance from the soap opera-like aftermath of my wedding by listening to family rumors, mostly from Aunt Sarah and Grandma Martha. After Richard was chased out of our reception by Katie, I found out everything that transpired. The very following week, Richard filed for divorce. To stop him, Katie did everything she could. Despite threats, promises, and tears, he refused to change. 2 months after the birth of her child, Richard insisted on a DNA test. When it turned out to be what Katie most likely already knew, I wasn't shocked. It wasn't his baby. Katie left with nothing because of their prenuptial agreement and the evidence of her adultery. No home, no fancy car, no alimony. Just her collection of designer handbags and the clothes in her closet. In order to help cover Katie's legal bills, Mom and Dad had to sell their vacation house. She brought her newborn son back to live with them. I didn't miss the irony. Now sleeping in her former bedroom, the golden child who had it all handed to her was subsisting on our parents' retirement funds. They attempted to place the blame on me. Naturally, the irate phone calls began approximately 1 month following my wedding. "Your sister's life has been ruined by you," I heard Mom yell into my voicemail. "It would have been all right if you had simply remained silent. You're not our daughter anymore." In his message, Dad said, "This is not how we brought you up." They found new ways to contact me, but I blocked their numbers once more. Emails and messages from family members, even correspondence delivered to my office. The message was the same each time. In their story, I was the bad guy. Katie's idyllic life was ruined by her envious older sister. However, I now led a new life that was full of love and sincere support. I was greeted warmly by Michael's family. Every Sunday, I got a call from his mom, Linda, just to talk. The best friend I never had as a child was his sister. Even his stern father, Tom, expressed his love in his own unique way. At family get-togethers, he always makes sure to save me the largest portion of his renowned barbecue brisket. What is the best thing about marriage, do you know? One evening, while we were snuggling on our couch and enjoying the sunset from our new house, which we had purchased together without the assistance of either of our families, Michael asked me, "What is that being able to select your family?" He kissed my forehead and said that love always entails family, but blood does not always imply love. He was correct. What I'd always desired was finally mine. A family that accepted me for who I was, rather than what they required of me. A husband who treated me like a daughter and rejoiced in my accomplishments, rather than comparing them to those of someone else's in-laws. Not a letdown. Grandma Martha, who still comes to see us frequently, loves Michael. During her most recent visit, she told me, "I always knew you'd find your way, sweetheart." The best places can occasionally be found by taking the most difficult routes. What happened to Katie after that is unknown to me. In all honesty, I'm not interested in finding out. According to rumors, she is still attempting to start over by living with our parents. I sometimes question whether they are still defending her actions or if they are finally seeing her for who she truly is. However, those thoughts no longer keep me awake at night. I now have my own family, which is based on sincere love, trust, and respect. As Michael and I prepare to have our first child, I am confident that the child will grow up in a household that values them for who they are without comparison to others. Getting even isn't always the best form of retaliation. It is leading a comfortable life, and I'm doing precisely that.